Most fans have more or less made their peace with the disastrous launch of CD Projekt Red's neon-tinted action RPG Cyberpunk 2077 by now, but the game has still had its issues and bugs. A new patch from the developers releasing soon will sort out a hefty bunch of those problems, though, and may chase off any lingering fears about support for the game being halted in the near future. Cyberpunk 2077's development process has been the subject of many a news cycle since the game's troubled release back in December, riddled with game-breaking bugs, mesmerizingly baffling NPC behavior, and an unplayable frame rate on some platforms. Some of these problems were addressed in the game's 1.1 update earlier this year, and yet more of the seemingly interminable backlog of fixes appear to be implemented in the 1.2 patch. The 1.2 update is a sizable one, including dozens of fixes and tweaks to all aspects of the game, and it appears that the changes that were teased earlier this month were just the tip of the iceberg. Alongside lengthening police response time, adding key bindings and fixing some aspects of driving, the patch will include fixes to a range of quests, and a large amount of glitches, from the amusing, fixed an issue where grappled enemies played voice lines as if the player bumped into them, to the baffling, fixed an issue where pedestrians could get teleported after being hit by a vehicle. And if the hundreds of changes to gameplay, quest scripts, environment, UI and performance weren't enough, the patch notes end with a simple promise, and many more. CDPR is clearly hoping that continued support and improvements for Cyberpunk 2077 will start to make up for its difficult launch, and the response on its forums has been broadly positive, with many users praising the developers for the huge amount of work they've clearly put in. Others were more reticent, however, perhaps remembering the extra bugs and issues caused by the game's last major patch. Still, it would appear that the developers are doing their best to make Cyberpunk the game they wanted it to be. Between the impressive scope of this patch and the planned upgrades for the PS5 and Xbox Series X/S version of the game, fans could see a new and rejuvenated game rise from the ashes, not unlike No Man's Sky, which quietly evolved into a genuinely fun and expansive game after its own problematic launch. The changes that this patch will bring could set the game right and lay the groundwork for the rumored upcoming DLC packs, meaning plenty more stuff to do while roaming the streets of Night City. Whatever happens though, true Cyberpunk aficionados will always be able to look back fondly on the time when a misplaced ladder could result in the player character's sudden and untimely demise. Extending the sliding ladder won't result in players' death if they are below it. While PC players were among the most unaffected by Cyberpunk 2077's broken launch, now many are unable to load the game at all. Of course, the goal with Cyberpunk 2077's massive 1.2 patch was to resolve a number of issues with all versions of the game, including NCPD spawn times and distance from V, a slew of various bugs and glitches, and improved graphics. However, it looks like PC players are having major game-breaking issues following the 1.2 patch to Cyberpunk 2077. At over 8,000 words in patch notes and 40 gigabytes in space, the version 1.2 patch to Cyberpunk 2077 is a hefty one, but it was quite necessary. The patch brings the game a little bit closer to what CD Projekt Red had hoped Cyberpunk would be at launch. With the word fixed appearing nearly 300 times in the notes, the main goal behind 1.2 was to fix many of the glitches observed by players. While the 1.2 patch affects the game across all platforms, the stability and performance section of the patch is geared towards the PS4 and Xbox One versions of the game. However, though PC players were the demographic most unaffected by Cyberpunk 2077's problematic launch, many are now reporting stability issues going so far as making the game unloadable. Several PC gamers are reporting major issues with Cyberpunk 2077 following the 1.2 patch, such as black screening, instant crashes upon launches, frame rate drops, and CPU's bottlenecking. One user reports that yesterday, prior to the patch installing, Cyberpunk 2077 ran buttery smooth, but now they are getting various black screen issues, they explain. This doesn't seem to be an issue with all PC gamers, however. Some are still able to play the game just as they were before, and some on the thread are even reporting some improvements following CDPR's massive patch. Still, with several players unable to load Cyberpunk 2077 at all on the first day of version 1.2's release without any way to resolve it likely means that many more players will experience the same problem. While it's normal to see some insignificant domino effects in game code, finding this many major bugs following an important patch to Cyberpunk 2077 likely means more fixes are soon to come, which could also result in more game-breaking issues. On the console side, despite the ambitions of the most recent update, Cyberpunk 2077 renders itself unplayable for one PS5 player after downloading the newest update. As it stands right now, Cyberpunk 2077 has a cacophony of technical flaws that oftentimes break the player's immersion or break the game altogether. For how much time CD Projekt Red has invested in trying to fix and improve Cyberpunk 2077, there are still several things wrong with the game. Even with the newest update installed, one PS5 player still experienced severe problems while playing. Since the game released back in December of last year, Cyberpunk 2077's performance on last-generation consoles especially has been unfavorable, to say the least. With Update 1.2 of Cyberpunk 2077 reportedly causing new problems for players upon downloading. Presumably, playing the PS4 version of Cyberpunk 2077 on a PS5 allows for greater stability, but according to one player, even next-gen systems are facing similar issues as a direct result of the newest patch. Twitter user Mutahar posted a clip of Cyberpunk 2077 gameplay on PS5 after downloading the most recent patch, and after about 15 seconds, the car clips through the ground and starts to fall into the skybox. This is nearly identical to a hole that Cyberpunk 2077 players found in Night City before the inevitable patches. For whatever reason, the game world won't load properly for Mutahar, and it's likely that other users are experiencing similar issues. It truly is surprising at this point how many additional issues have arisen as a direct result of these patches. It's clear that CD Projekt Red wants to fix this game, considering it wouldn't make much sense for the studio to intentionally make the game as buggy as it currently is. Though, the fact that the game still isn't functioning properly for some users, in spite of these updates, is rather concerning. Then again, similar technical issues first plagued The Witcher 3 when it first released, and once those issues were properly addressed, the game went on to become one of the most celebrated games ever created. Given that the scope of ambitions the studio has for Cyberpunk 2077 is practically on par with that of The Witcher 3, many remain hopeful that the game will be fixed in due time. However, as of right now, Cyberpunk 2077 is still a far cry from what it could be. For users like Mutahar, Cyberpunk 2077 is outright unplayable, considering that vehicles can just clip through the ground at any point. The fact that Cyberpunk 2077 is still missing from the PlayStation Store nearly 3 months after it was first taken down is still surprising for many. All fans can do right now is hope that CD Projekt Red continues to remain aware and reactive of the issues the game has. Moving forward, we have a DLC leak for Cyberpunk and also a response for them from its creators. Already, the studio has released a number of updates with another big patch released. Naturally, the studio also has plans for additional content to be added to the game, similarly to what it did with The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, and according to a new leak, some of that content could start rolling out quite soon. The latest rumored information comes from Prickly Assassin from the Cyberpunk 2077 subreddit. In the thread, the user found some evidence that new content is coming after Epic Games increased the server capacity for the game from 100 GB to 500 GB, a move which typically happens months before content arrives. However, in addition to the server capacity increase, the add-ons section for the game on the Epic Games Store was also recently changed. Back in February, 18 pieces of content were listed, though after the recent page update, only 10 now remain and heavily imply being part of the smaller free content additions such as new cosmetics, quest lines, and other skins. However, the user indicated that 3 paid DLC expansions were also added, leading many to assume longer-form content similar to Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine from The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt. As exciting as this may be, fans should take it all with a grain of salt, as many in the thread have cast doubt on this found information. While Prickly Assassin continues to deny accusations of having crafted this information, the thread itself has been locked by moderators due to what they felt was information being posted through pirated content. With the content expected to arrive sooner than later, if the Epic Games Store update is any indication, players may be hearing more on the content shortly. Then again, it's also feasible that CD Projekt Red's timeframe has been completely altered thanks in large part to the massive data breach the studio experienced earlier this year. Not only did the hacker obtain the source code for Cyberpunk 2077, Gwent, The Witcher 3, and the unreleased version of Witcher 3, they encrypted the servers and eventually sold the data online when CD Projekt Red refused to meet their demands. Now the developer stepped forward days after the massive leak revealed 3 DLC content packs scheduled for 2021. Surprisingly, according to a representative for CD Projekt Red, the names of the upcoming content packs were confirmed to not be DLCs for Cyberpunk 2077. For months now, players were under the assumption that CD Projekt Red would release the cut content in the form of DLC, although apparently, that may have never been the case. Per the screenshots, here were the Cyberpunk 2077 Epic Store listings. Ripper Docks expansion. Body Shops expansion. Fashion Forward. Gangs of Night City. Body of Chrome. Rides of the Dark Future. The Relic. Neck Deep. Night City expansion. Expansion Pass. Of all things, the greatest implication from this announcement is that all of the DLC, even the ones suspected to come with a heavy amount of content, will be available for free. Even more so, some titles like The Relic and Night City expansion are incredibly speculative as to what the content behind the title may bring. Much like The Witcher 3, CD Projekt Red plans to combine free, smaller content releases with larger, paid expansions, and as none of the above are DLC, it also especially leaves the question of what the developer has up its sleeve in terms of its actual DLC. What is becoming clear is that Cyberpunk 2077 won't be another Anthem. CD Projekt Red has a lot in store for the future of Cyberpunk 2077, even if that means keeping the player base in the dark. Granted, as long as gamers can finally venture around a fully fleshed out Night City without any game-breaking bugs, it likely isn't too bad of a trade-off. So after all the DLC leaks and rumors, a multiplayer mode for Cyberpunk 2077 was planned. CD Projekt Red offered a vague update during its strategy meeting earlier this week. Now, it's possible that the project has been delayed or even altogether cancelled. With so many other necessary patches and fixes for Cyberpunk 2077 still needed to bring the gameplay experience up to speed with what was expected, it wouldn't be surprising to see CDPR ditch the multiplayer mode. While 2022 was the projected release date for the multiplayer mode, CD Projekt hasn't offered many details about what players should expect from it, but Cyberpunk 2077 leaks earlier this year detailed something along the lines of a heist mode and deathmatch mode. But now, it's possible that a multiplayer mode may not be coming at all. In a strategy update, President Adam Kaczynski outlines the changes CD Projekt Red is making in areas such as game development efficiency, strengthening internal communication, and adjusting PR campaigns. While the studio didn't have much to say on the multiplayer mode that fans have been expecting to land next year, CDPR says it's currently being reconsidered. At the same time, CDPR also says that online capabilities will become an important goal for the studio. We are focusing on bringing online into all of our franchises one day, rather than creating a large multiplayer experience only for Cyberpunk, CDPR states. But what this means specifically remains a mystery. Previously, CD Projekt Red fell back on the reasoning that Cyberpunk 2077's many glitches and game-breaking bugs were in part due to the pushback of dated technology found in the PS4 and Xbox One, which is why the game runs much more smoothly on PCs and the newest generation of consoles. However, playing the last-gen versions of the game on PS5s and Xbox Series X still finds a number of issues such as crashing and poor AI. With that in mind, it's difficult to imagine a smooth gameplay experience with Cyberpunk 2077's multiplayer, at least on PS4 or Xbox One. Perhaps this means that CDPR plans to leave behind the previous console generation in regards to a multiplayer mode and focus mainly on PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X as the hardware that best handles Cyberpunk 2077's demands. On the other hand, many gamers agree that, if CDPR delivers a buggy multiplayer, it could hurt the studio's reputation even more rather than fix it. And despite making promises to be more clear with messaging, CD Projekt Red also confuses its investors with what is going on with Cyberpunk 2077 multiplayer. While many players believe that Cyberpunk 2077's multiplayer is entirely cancelled, or at least should be, another possibility is that multiplayer will be integrated into the game, and will no longer exist as a standalone. Even though many viewers, including investors, were confused by CDPR's announcement to reconsider multiplayer, the developer said it plans to add online capabilities into all of its franchises, which includes Cyberpunk 2077. Additionally, multiplayer was some of the content CDPR promised, even though it had previously planned it to be a separate standalone title. The developer would likely receive more backlash if it announced a full cancellation of the multiplayer mode, so it's most likely looking for a way to integrate multiplayer in a way that's most beneficial for the studio while satisfying any players possibly looking forward to it. In fact, adding a multiplayer mode onto a game that many people have already purchased as a sort of two-for deal might actually make it up to some players, because it means they won't need to purchase an entirely separate game to get the experience, but rather, they might already own the game needed to do so. Ultimately, it's unclear what CDPR's plans are for Cyberpunk 2077's multiplayer. The developer hasn't yet announced a firm cancellation, but did explain its plans to integrate online capabilities into all of its franchises, meaning players can still hold out hope for some form of multiplayer in Cyberpunk 2077. Additionally to this, Cyberpunk 2077 developer CD Projekt Red believes that the game might be on its way to making a return to the PlayStation Store. In a rare move, Sony axed Cyberpunk 2077 from the PlayStation Store only days after its release. The title's PS4 version suffered so many bugs and glitches that most of its buyers found it practically unplayable. The situation spiraled to the point that it forced Sony to refund Cyberpunk 2077 copies alongside CD Projekt Red, again, a situation that's never really happened before. Hence the reason the company settled on removing the game, even after adding a disclaimer to it. However, in the present day, CD Projekt Red believes it's made enough changes to Cyberpunk 2077 that it might be ready to return to the PlayStation Store. Ever since the disaster that was the game's launch, CDPR has pushed out numerous different patches for it across all its platforms, and each one served to fix some of the numerous bugs and glitches plaguing the game's overall performance. In short, CDPR believes Cyberpunk has come a long way since its release. When paraphrased, Michael Nowakowski essentially made these comments on behalf of CD Projekt Red yesterday during an investor call. In particular, Nowakowski, the SVP of Business Development, pointed out Cyberpunk 2077's recent 1.2 patch, since it's the studio's biggest one to date, reportedly correcting a whopping 500 bugs and glitches across all the game's platforms. Nowakowski believes this patch and its predecessors have brought Cyberpunk closer to returning to the PlayStation Store. Whether or not Cyberpunk actually does manage to do this is ultimately depends on Sony though, something Nowakowski himself notes. Having to refund the game in the first place isn't something Sony was happy to do. PlayStation boss Jim Ryan even took subtle shots at CD Projekt Red about Cyberpunk's quality sometime after the fact. Sony said it wouldn't add the game back to the store until it was fixed, so if it meant that literally, the title may still have a ways to go, especially considering the PC port. Some fans report that the 1.2 patch made Cyberpunk's PC performance worse. Cyberpunk currently runs best on PC, so if the patch only made things worse there, it might have caused some unforeseen bugs with the PS4 and Xbox One versions of the game as well. Otherwise, the hit to PC's performance might be a sign that making Cyberpunk run better on lesser gaming systems jeopardizes its performance on the higher quality ones, such as the PS5. In which case, Sony's still not going to run the game. In the middle of this chaos, CD Projekt Red is streamlining its development process by developing both The Witcher and Cyberpunk simultaneously as part of a transformation plan. Developing AAA games is a labor-intensive process that can cost millions of dollars and take years of work before a game goes gold and is released. CD Projekt Red, the developer behind both The Witcher and Cyberpunk 2077, is now looking to streamline the development process and begin developing its two big franchises simultaneously. CD Projekt Red's The Witcher series, based on novels of the same name, is one of video games' most beloved franchises, and the latest entry, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, was a critical and commercial success. The developer's newest game, Cyberpunk 2077, has had a much more mixed reception due to its massive amount of glitches and technical issues. Now, CD Projekt revealed its new approach to game development in a strategy update video to avoid situations like Cyberpunk 2077 and prepare for future projects in development. In the video, the leadership team at CD Projekt Red announced that as part of the Red 2.0 transformation plan, development on Cyberpunk and The Witcher would run parallel, with members of the development team working across both projects. The leadership team also mentions that the changes will improve their content quality and further develop a sustainable work environment. The video itself is more for investors than fans, and is primarily concerned with boosting confidence in the company's direction after a tough year and the departure of senior members of the development team. The next game in the Witcher franchises is probably years away, so it makes sense that the developers implement these changes now. In the strategy update, the leadership team talks about centralizing the Red engine so two teams can work on both their flagship series at the same time. The teams can continue to support Cyberpunk 2077 while using what they learned to improve the Witcher series development. Head of Productions and CTO, Paweł Zawodny, believes that if the company achieves its goal with the Red 2.0 transformation plan, then parallel AAA development will begin in 2022. The plan mentioned in the update seems to address many criticisms about CD Projekt Red's development process, even those outside of its games. The company came under fire last year, as it backtracked on its statement that no one would have to crunch on the Cyberpunk 2077's development, as multiple sources confirmed that the development team had indeed crunched ahead of the game's release. The video mentions that one of the Red 2.0 transformation plan goals is improving the work environment, but whether that will end crunch altogether seems unlikely. The backlash to the Cyberpunk 2077 broke a lot of consumer goodwill that CD Projekt Red had with its fans and possibly even affected the company's relationship with Sony as it removed the game from the PlayStation Store. Whether this new approach will prove effective in preventing another release like Cyberpunk 2077, only time will tell, but the Red 2.0 transformation plan could be a good first step. We also have another CDPR news, as Polish video game developer CD Projekt Red is expanding its roots with the acquisition of a new studio that will help its existing studios with upcoming projects. This new piece of information comes just a day after the company released a hefty patch for its latest release, Cyberpunk 2077. Cyberpunk 2077 launched with a plethora of game-breaking issues last December. Since then, CD Projekt Red has been hard at work on fixing the game's various bugs and further optimizing the game's performance on various platforms. Interestingly, aside from fixing its latest release, the company has also been working to acquire the Canada-based game development studio Digitalscapes. CD Projekt announced the acquisition news via its official website. Digitalscapes, as it seems, is the foundation of CD Projekt Red's fourth development team labeled as CD Projekt Red Vancouver. According to the PR, the studio will join the company's other development teams, based in Warsaw, Krakow and Wrocław, to jointly work on the studio's upcoming projects. The press release also mentions how Digitalscapes is CD Projekt Red's trusted partner, and that both companies have been working for the last 3 years on Cyberpunk 2077. Although there's no confirmation on what the Vancouver team is currently working on, Digitalscape's official website seems to indicate that it's working on the multiplayer mode for Cyberpunk 2077. Although CD Projekt Red has shipped The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk 2077, two massive open-world AAA titles in the past few years, it is still a relatively small company. Its home office in Warsaw has over 550 employees, whereas its Krakow and Wrocław office has 70 and 18 employees, respectively. Having a fourth development studio could ease up the development process a bit and presumably reduce the achingly long time between its releases. As of now, CD Projekt Red has its hands full with planning and releasing post-launch content for Cyberpunk 2077. Although a commercial success, Cyberpunk 2077 hasn't fared well with its fans due to massive performance and optimization issues. And finally we a Witcher 3 news, as CD Projekt Red is working on a graphically improved version of The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt and plans to release it on next-gen consoles later this year. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt was one of the best-reviewed games of 2015. Now, the climax of Geralt of Rivia's three-game saga is on its way to next-gen consoles. According to an official statement from CD Projekt Red, the next-gen version of The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is in development for the PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X. CDPR plans to have the new versions out the door sometime in the second half of 2021. CD Projekt dropped this news in the studio's group strategy update on March 30th. PR manager Radek Grabowski and the Witcher series Twitter account later tweeted out the same news. The game was technically already available on next-gen consoles thanks to backward comparability, but the new release will allow it to properly take advantage of more advanced hardware. The studio promises the next-gen update will bring visual and technical improvements to the popular RPG. The game's website specifically mentions ray tracing and faster loading speed as new features that gamers can expect. However, it's not yet clear if the new version will support 4K HD. Still, that seems likely given Cyberpunk 2077's 4K functionality. The next-gen edition includes the base game and all DLC. The new version will be available both as a standalone purchase and as a free upgrade for players who already own The Witcher 3 on PC, PS4, or Xbox One. Pricing of the standalone version is currently unavailable. However, it is unlikely to be significantly more expensive than the $49.99 Witcher 3 Game of the Year edition. Incidentally, the Steam version of the GOTY edition is currently on sale for only $9.99. The Witcher 3 is considered by some to be one of the best RPGs of all time, so it is no surprise CDPR is updating it for next-gen hardware. It also was not the only news to come out of the studio's group strategy update video. CD Projekt Red announced plans to continue working on both The Witcher and Cyberpunk franchises. That includes simultaneously developing AAA games in both series starting in 2022. Given the troubled release of Cyberpunk 2077 late last year, it might seem a little early for the studio to be spreading itself so thin. Multiple people have compared the development of Cyberpunk 2077 to that of BioWare's Anthem. Both games suffered from many of the same difficulties, including an overstretched development team. Anthem's development additionally suffered from being one of several AAA open-world games developed simultaneously. It would be unfortunate if the company that some see as BioWare's primary rival continued to repeat its mistakes. Still, these new projects are potentially a long way off. The company has also promised to address many of its issues in the future. This includes hiring new staff, reorganizing how the studio, being more careful with game announcements. For now though, fans have the upcoming Witcher 3 update to look forward to. Hopefully, it has a smoother release than the last big game CDPR rolled out. And that's all for the video. It's been a long video guys. Give the video a thumbs up and share the video for a bigger audience. Comment your thoughts on the topics, and let me know how Cyberpunk runs on your console or PC if you own it. Subscribe if you are new and click the bell icon for instant updates. And until then from SMPV it's goodbye.